enough time to cover the outstanding transactions within the economy. Money is created out of debt through loans, and interest is charged for those loans, whether it is a government bond or a personal home equity loan. If every single debt was called in right now in our economy, there would be an enormous amount of money that is literally impossible to pay back in domestic currency. This is a central reason why stratification and inequality is literally built into our system. The inherent scarcity of the money supply itself. Imagine that. In this system, bankruptcy isn't some irregular byproduct that negligent people just happen to stumble into. It is an inevitable built-in attribute. It's a game of musical chairs. I hope that's clear. In the words of economist Bernard Lietaer, a great quote, "Greed and competition are not the result of a mutable human temperament. Greed and fear of scarcity are, in fact, being continuously created and amplified as a direct result of the kind of money we are using. We can produce more than enough food to feed everybody, but there is clearly not enough money to pay for it all. The scarcity is in our national currencies. In fact, the job of the central banks is to create and maintain that scarcity. The direct consequence is that we have to fight with each other in order to survive." That last sentence really defines so much. The direct consequence is that we have to fight with each other in order to survive. The consequence of these mechanisms is, again, extreme social imbalance and hence social stratification. With this understood, let's now consider the state of income inequality within the world. Now, I bring all of this up as an introduction to what we're going to talk about in regards to social health. Coupled with this, however, I think a few stats should be digested. In 2007, chief executives of the largest 365 U.S. companies received well over 500 times the pay of the average employee. In many of these top companies, the chief executive is paid more in one day than the average worker makes in a year. The Walmart family, which is about 6 people, the Waltons, has a combined fortune estimated at about $90 billion in 2009, according to Forbes. The combined wealth of the lower 40% of the U.S. population is only $95 billion. Also, the highest paid jobs on the planet are in fields of trading and investment, occupations which have no meaning whatsoever, create nothing. They are pointless to the state of society and the natural world. In 2005, the average annual take-home pay for managers of the top 26 hedge funds, aka gambling casinos, was $363 million each. Compare that to the average medical doctor, which makes about $150,000 a year, and the biological research scientists, which are looking for cures and treatments for diseases, which makes only about $68,000 a year. You get the point. So now, we present the question. What does this mean to our health, to our well-being? Groundbreaking research by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett of the UK in the area of social inequalities in health and the social detriments of health has given us some profound realizations about what it means to have a society based and driven by inequality. To summarize this groundbreaking research, the common view that social problems are caused directly by singular material conditions such as bad housing or poor diets or lack of educational opportunities and so on is being overturned. The idea that more wealthy societies do better than poorer societies in regard to health in general is not the case. The social problems abundant in rich, highly stratified countries are largely caused by the scale of material differences between people within society itself. The problem is not absolute income, but rather the problem of relative income. If you compare groups of people with the same income in different countries, you find that those in more unequal countries do much worse than those in more equal countries with the same income. It appears to be a psychosocial phenomenon. Inequality seems to make countries socially dysfunctional. And as based on measures of societal health, crime rates, and well-being, it is safe to say, as you will see me point out, that really our current structure is nothing more than a social failure. life expectancy. On this chart, we see a specific set of wealthy countries. I apologize for those that can't read this in the back. I'll do my best to point out what is going on here. Basically, the y-axis you see is life expectancy, and the x-axis is income inequality going from left to right, low to high. Life expectancy, bottom to top, of course, low to high. As you can see in this, Japan has the lowest amount of income inequality, but with a staggeringly high life expectancy. While Singapore, trumping only the United States in this particular set of countries analyzed, which are mostly wealthy countries, has the greatest income inequality. And the regression line in the middle shows clearly how the patterns moving from lower inequality to greater inequality reduces the life expectancy of all of these countries. Drug use. We see the United States as having the highest level of inequality based on the sample set, while also being within the top 4 of countries with the most illegal drug use: US, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. While in the lower echelon you have Japan, Sweden, and Finland, which have the least amount of inequality and the least drug use. Well, Greece is in there too. The trends that are important here. You can see the clear regression line. Let's continue on to mental illness. Mental illness is much more common in more unequal countries. Once again, we have the US at the peak of mental illness. We have Japan at the lowest echelon. As you can see from this chart, mental illness and inequality are very much correlated. A quick glance at SSRI antidepressant drug visits to doctor's offices among adults 18 years of age or older in the United States from 1995 to 2002 shows a clear trend of growing dependencies on antidepressants. The most common type of disorders, of course, are anxiety and depression. A psychologist by the name of Jean Twenge did an interesting study which proved that Americans are much more anxious than they used to be. A survey of college students from 1952 to 1993 across 52,000 students found that students today were more anxious, than 85% of the population at the beginning of the study, meaning 1952. By the late 1980s, the average American child was more anxious than the child psychiatric patients of the 1950s. Now, of course, I know what you're saying. What about genetics? I think Richard Wilkinson summed it up very well. Although mental illness can be affected by changes in the levels of certain chemicals in the brain, nobody has shown that these are actually causes of depression, rather than changes caused by depression. Although some genetic vulnerability may underlie some mental illness, this cannot by itself explain the huge rise in illness in recent decades. Our genes cannot change that fast. And this leads us to rates of imprisonment. The trend is very acute as well. Obviously, as we can see, imprisonment rates are much higher in unequal countries. The more unequal the country, the more people in prison. However, what is interesting about this reality is that it doesn't just relate to rates of crime, which of course is more prevalent in unequal societies, but it also has to do with the punitive attitudes toward the so-called criminal elements of society. In other words, the more unequal the society, the harsher the punishments are for a given offense. And hence, more people are put into prison for longer periods of time than they are in more equal countries. Since 1984, the state of California has built 1 new school and 20 new prisons. As an aside, for those out there who think the prison system might serve some therapeutic rehabilitation role in the modification of human beings and human behavior, I would like to refer back once again to our prison psychiatrist James Gilligan for his perspective. He states, "The most effective way to turn a nonviolent person into a violent one is to send him to prison. The criminal justice and penal systems have been operating under a huge mistake, namely the belief that punishment will deter, prevent, or inhibit violence, when in fact it is the most powerful stimulant of violence we have yet discovered." Now, given this reality, it begs the question, what is the actual psychosocial cause of these issues? What are the most dominant mechanisms in place that continually support class division and the neuroses and sickness it generates? Well, we really don't have to look very far for a viable possibility. The cultural programming wing of the market system is the advertising industry, which serves to perpetuate the consumption values that you see around you. However, it goes much deeper than that. It goes much deeper than just getting people to buy things for a specific company's profit.